Madam, I thank you for this opportunity to take part in the debate. And I do want to say that I have heard many good things about this debate, but I do also want to share a few of my thoughts. The budget is focused on building Singapore's future. It follows the fundamental policy shifts spoken of by the Prime Minister in his New Year message to Singaporeans. The focus is on Singaporeans, and I agree that it should be. The budget makes provision for families, students, the elderly, employers, employees, Singapore businesses. It has been hailed as inclusive. But unlike the previous budget, I have not heard it make specific provisions for persons who serve in the social service sector or for persons who are served by the social service sector. However, I would not raise alarm bells prematurely. The term Singaporeans includes persons with disabilities and persons with other needs. And I trust that the budget statement is broad enough to include the social service sector. So that being the case, I look forward to the Committee of Supply debates for greater clarity on the inclusiveness of the budget. With that preface, I want to raise a few issues for clarification, consideration, and debate in the interim. There are two main parts to my speech. The first relates to the social service sector, and in this respect, I again declare my interest as the President of SPD and as a board member of SG Enable. The Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance referred to in his speech, he referred to the Hock-Lee-Paws of the early days. And I do assure him that I belong to that generation that recognizes and knows the meaning of that term. He also shared that there will be more Hock-Lee-Paws coming in the coming years. But I think that the landscape has changed, and what we are going to be doing with our 24 Hock-Lee-Paws will be very different from what the earlier Hock-Lee-Paw used to do. The earlier Social Welfare Department services or looks at needs. You can't do this, I help you. And primarily, the assistance is given through financial means. Times have changed. The landscape has changed. Aspirations have changed. People expect more. People hope for more. They dream higher and they dream bigger. In connection with that, the social service sector requirements have also grown more stringent. There is greater requirement for professionalism and for governance. As a result, we now have a social service sector that is driven not primarily by volunteers, although volunteers form a very important part of the sector, but it's also driven by professionals. The need to professionalize the sector cannot be underestimated. And likewise, the need also to equip and empower the persons who are served within the sector, not just to receive the monthly allowances, but to be financially independent. And so we are now faced with a sector that demands more, that is required to give a lot more. Because of that, I would urge the House to consider and the government to consider the need for us to place greater and more integrated emphasis in the training of persons with disabilities within the sector. We need to try ways in which we can align and consolidate and review the schemes that we now have to train persons with disabilities so that we can empower them and so that we can equip them to be independent financially to the fullest extent possible. We know that people who have disabilities can serve. These are an important pool of resources. They are our very own resources that, like any other, we have to respect, nurture, and tap upon. So in relation with that, when the Minister for Finance and Deputy Prime Minister announced Skills Future, it was encouraging. Encouraging because here we now have another scheme, and hopefully at a more macro level, in which we can train our people with deeper skills to move into the future. let's do it inclusively. Let's try not to waste resources and duplicate courses. Where we can, consolidate and bring all in. In training together, we also achieve the advantage of having persons with and without disabilities working together. And that also assists and facilitates their inclusion into the workforce. In relation also to the strengthening of the collaboration between trade unions, employers, and other persons within industries, I also trust that the social service sector input would be tapped and that the social service sector would be looked upon as a key partner in this respect. There is much in terms of experience that the sector can offer, and they are also a good channel for us to move into and tap the previously latent potential of the persons who are served within the sector. And faced with a tightening labor market, I do not think we have a choice, apart from the fact that we do have an enduring interest to ensure that everyone in Singapore, whether they are persons with or without disability, whether they are well off or they are less endowed, that each of us have the dignity of holding a job and have the dignity of saying that we contribute to our country. In relation to that, underlying what I am saying is that we need to create a social service sector that is sustainable by itself. In the early days, when we had the social welfare department, and when what was done was inadequate, we had charities mushrooming, coming up to fill the gaps. They were mainly driven by volunteers, and they were mainly driven by compassion and charity. We need to move away, ironically, from a charity mindset for the social service sector. We need to have a sector that behaves and drives itself professionally and not depend only on charity. The sector has benefited largely from the generosity of the government in the past budgets. But I think it is important and imperative that we should help the sector to become sustainable. So in this respect, again, I will ask the government to consider how you can help to catalyze and help to provide support for the sector to be able to enhance and augment the resources that we have, to be able to raise revenue in a way that is more sustainable to run the programs that we need to run. Madam, I now move on to the next portion of my speech, and this would be a little bit more fragmented, but essentially it would be based primarily, again, on not collective responsibility, but personal responsibility. There has been a lot of talk about collective responsibility, and I do respect and I do agree that it is important. But what I want to share is that we need to talk about collective responsibility in the context of each person exercising their personal responsibility as well. If we take Skills Future, there's been a lot of praise for that. And I like that. And I don't like to be negative, but unfortunately I am. I am afraid that if we do not run Skills Future properly, then for every $1 billion that we are going to spend for the next 5 years, we are going to have it go down the drain. How can we ensure, unlike infrastructure investments, where we can see the returns, where we can see the outcomes, how can we ensure that the Skills Future investment that we are going to make will yield positive, significant impact? I don't know. I don't have the answer, and perhaps it may be premature to ask for answers at this moment. But I do want to say that the people who are going to be running the curriculum, the people who are going to be conducting the training, have to exercise integrity and professionalism, and they have to look at the picture at a macro level. It would be a sad day indeed if people were to say, let's spend it, we have got the budget anyway. It doesn't matter what course we do, just give them a certificate. It's going to defeat what we are going to do, because we are going to be investing in long-term development of the employment skills of our people, because we're talking about moving into the future. I have other concerns, and that relates also to the research and development budget. We're going to be putting $1 billion into the National Research Fund. It's a good thing. I believe in the importance of intellectual property. But I also believe that we need to understand the nature of intellectual property very clearly before we work out the KPIs to measure the success of each investment. In every collaboration, and I do believe that our national research initiatives are mainly collaborative efforts, there will always be negotiations into who owns what at the end of the day. I bring in this, you bring in that, and then how are we going to be differentiating? How are the researchers motivated? By the production of research papers, or by the production of intellectual property, foreground intellectual property that is of strategic importance to Singapore? How do we ensure that we are able to isolate in our negotiations with our collaborators the items, the desired outcomes that we want? How do we know which parts of the foreground intellectual property would be relevant to us, would be useful for us, would be strategic for us? I do know again that the answer is likely to be that the people who run the programs would be the best persons to tell us. But I do also ask that perhaps we may want to exercise a little bit more diligence. I am not sure of the full process that is involved, and perhaps the government can clarify this. But let us not put $1 billion and end up with insignificant intellectual property. In relation to the issue of CPF, this was just mentioned barely in passing, and the Workers' Party has also spoken about that. I believe that we have the right to spend the money, our money, any way we want it, whenever we want it. I believe also that we can do anything we want, whenever we want. But when what we do is going to have a foreseeable effect or cause foreseeable loss or injury to another person, there is merit for us to argue that that right has got to be circumscribed. And so, in relation to the use of CPF monies, we have heard proponents or people who say, proponents who argue that CPF money is theirs. It's our money, it's in our account, it's our retirement money. I want it out, I will spend it any way we want. Fine. Is it our money? I'm not sure if I want to go into legalese, and I certainly don't want to argue about ownership rights. Our CPF savings are enhanced and forced CPF savings, which are accumulated through our own deferred consumption, through co-payment by our employers, and through top-ups from public funds. Is it really my private money? Do I have the right to spend it the way I would spend my own salary? I'm not entirely sure. But I know at the end of the day that because I am not the only person contributing to that fund, I cannot be the only person to call the shots as to how I'm going to spend it. At the very least, I have a moral obligation to spend it wisely. Why do I say that? Because if I am not judicious in my spending, at the end of the day, who is going to maintain me in my twilight years? The state? Who? Ultimately, it means someone else is bearing it, right? Another taxpayer. So if I'm not judicious and I'm arguing, this is my money, I'm not going to be responsible in my use. And if I argue, this is your money, you use it any way you want, I'm not responsible as a citizen. There is also the role of the family too. We talk a lot about educating the members as to how they can withdraw their money, how they should use or should not use. But there must be a lot more education on whether or not the family should support their retirees, support their parents in the retirement. Is that going to feature when we allow the flexibility in the withdrawal? Madam, I have great unease, and I cannot support this recommendation that we allow such flexibility to the people. I have unease because I think we are placing a very great fiscal obligation upon our future generations, living off what our forefathers have built for us. So we have, in conclusion, Madam, a budget that is arguably very generous, and for which I am also very thankful. We have a budget that has been praised and approved as being leaning to the left. But I would also argue that if we lean too much to the left, we will not have much left. So what I will want to also then end up with and conclude, Madam, is that when we talk about collective responsibility, we need to understand that collective responsibility must also be exercised responsibly on a collective basis as well as a personal basis. So when the government talks about redistributing wealth, we welcome that. Then the people who are going to be implementing the schemes, conducting the training, doing the assessments, and evaluating the curriculum and whatever we are doing, the people who are dispensing the funds have to exercise personal responsibility to ensure that there is no wastage. There will always be inevitable leakage. The people who benefit also have to ensure personal responsibility in acting with integrity in their claims for the money. When we talk about personal choice, choice always comes with responsibility. Benefits come with obligations. And when we exercise our personal choice, there is a price to be paid. And Madam, I submit that price should not be paid by someone else. And with that, I support the motion.